This conference will now be recorded.
So thank you all very much for spending your evening with me tonight. It's nice to see so many people have joined. I'm Eve Mulholland. I am the People Engagement Officer for a project called Dynamic Dunescapes. Dynamic Dunescapes is a project working across England and Wales. It's funded by National Lottery Heritage Fund and EU Life Programme, working with multiple partners across the country. And tonight we're going to be talking about the wildlife and conservation of Haverigg dunes and the input that the project actually has into this site as well. And we're working closely on this site with local landowners, including Millham Town Council, as well as Natural England and Cumbria Wildlife Trust. So I hope you enjoy the talk this evening. It'll take about 30 to 40 minutes, so I'll allow plenty of time at the end for discussion. As we go through the talk, if you do have any questions that pop to mind, there is a little comments button. It looks like a speech mark on your screen, so you can pop any questions in there as we go, and I'll answer those questions at the end and open up chance for discussion, as I say. So I hope you enjoy the talk. So Dynamic Dunescapes, it's a big and ambitious project which is working across England and Wales to restore some of the most important sand dune systems. And this isn't just for the benefit of wildlife, it's for the people and communities of these areas too. And for sand dunes to be healthy, they need to be free to move and be dynamic to support the special wildlife that lives there. So as part of the project, we'll be working closely with local landowners, local community groups, schools, visitors, people of all ages and backgrounds, local to national experts as well, to help rejuvenate the dunes and allow the threatened wildlife there to flourish. So the project's working all around England and Wales. So we're covering 11 sites in Cumbria in total. That's of 33 sites across England and Wales. So working around Cumbria, around Sefton, north and south of Wales, Devon, Cornwall, Dorset and Lincolnshire too. And in Cumbria, working from the Silloth all the way down Copeland, including Drigg, Esmeals, Haverigg dunes, which we're focusing on this evening, around Barrowborough, including Roanhead and Sandscale Hawes, north and south Walney. And the Cumbria team are actually covering Fleetwood in Lancashire too, so it's a big project area covering lots of very important sand dune systems. So let's focus in a little bit more on Haverigg dunes then. And Haverigg dunes is a fantastic place. It sits on the very edge of the Duddon estuary, and it's designated for the wildlife in a whole range of reasons. So the site where the dune sits is just in this yellow bit of land there on the map. And it sits within a Ramsar site. It's a site of special scientific interest. It's also within a special area of conservation, a special protected area as well. And you can see the sand dunes there sit within all of these designations. And this covers the whole of the Duddon estuary. So the whole of the double estuary is a triple SI and has all of these designations through the project area as well. But Haverigg dunes is made up of a really wide variety of habitats. So this is Haverigg dunes that we can see in the coloured area here. And the majority of the habitat is made up of fixed dunes. But within those fixed dune systems, you can see that there's other wetland habitats, and there's areas of scrub, and there's quite a large area of salt marsh which is starting to develop there. But the dunes are also expanding and shifting here, and the shingle spit is starting to form out towards inland to the estuary. And new dunes, embryo dunes, which we call, are starting to form on top of these dunes too. So it's a very diverse area. There's lots of different habitats and lots of different things going on in this small patch of land. So we're going to focus in a little bit more closely into the species that live here a little bit later on. So sand dunes, they're an incredible habitat, but as well as sand, including Haverigg dunes, they are classified as the habitat most at risk in Europe for biodiversity loss. And this is because only 20,000 hectares of sand dunes remain in England and Wales, and this is approximately half the area of the Isle of Wight, so it's not really that big, really. And since about the 1900s, Wales itself has lost 60% of its sand dune habitats. So therefore, it's been identified as a priority habitat in 2020. And this is because the dunes are home to many, many rare specialised species, which we're going to talk about today. But the dunes have become overgrown with vegetation and they have stabilised, putting threat to the wildlife that lives there. So Dynamic Dunescapes is all about implementing new conservation techniques to restore these sand dune systems, to help manage them in a new, better way for the wildlife that lives there. So let's have a look into how sand dunes develop. How do sand dunes begin their life? So sand dunes form as singular grains of sand which are pushed up the shore and blown by the wind. And these sands start to accumulate on objects. And this might be stones, it might be a log, it might be vegetation that already lives there. But pioneer species are the first species to grow in these areas, and these are highly specialised species. So marram grass is the most common one, which we'll find. It's all over Haverigg dunes, all over all of the other dunes that we're working on too. And marram grass grows as fast as the sand bills. It's got really long fibrous roots. So as the sand bills, more and more marram grass will grow, starting to form these sandy mobile dunes which will build. And these hold a range of specialised species, including the sea holly, which is in this image on the bottom left-hand side. And these habitats are made up of lots of sand with dotted vegetation in between. But this is one of the main habitats which is important for our species that we're going to talk about today. And as you go into the dune system, as more and more plants start to grow and die down, more nutrients are input into the ground. So it means different types of species can start to live here. And as you go into further into the dune systems, you'll get patches of fixed dunes. And these contain less bare sand as more species grow and colonise this area. And this might include carpets of mosses, of lichens, dune heath, and a range of wildflowers too. And within these dune systems, you have your dune slacks. So wind will blow through the dunes and open up a depression in the dune systems. And this will start to erode away areas of the dunes, bringing it closer to the water table. So this means these kind of areas are much damper, known as your dune slats, and they'll hold water, perhaps not for all of the year, but for part of the year. They do dry up as well. But these are also very important for a range of highly adapted species that will live there, including invertebrate assemblages, your natterjack toads, rare and specialised plants as well, such as your roundleaf wintergreen, early marsh orchids. And the later stages of succession is your scrubland habitat. There's more and more nutrients in the ground, so scrub and coarser grasses, even trees can start to grow here too. These in itself is an important habitat for species like birds, which will nest there. But you tend to find them in patches throughout the dune systems. However, going back to why dunes are at risk, the habitat most at risk in Europe for biodiversity loss. Well, there's a range of factors which have contributed to this, and we'll focus in on some of the contributions that have happened at Haverigg dunes. So rabbits were once the main graziers of many of the sand dune systems up and down Cumbria. They'd graze, keeping that scrub and coarser vegetation at bay, but also burrow, opening up bare patches of sand, kick-starting those early successional stages. But dunes have also been used for cattle grazing as well, and historically sheep grazing too. And these do a similar role to what rabbits do. They'll disturb the ground in a way, making bare patches of bare sand and keeping that vegetation at bay through grazing. But unfortunately, we've seen a large loss of rabbit populations and change in how the land is actually being used by graziers as well. Myxomatosis, a man-made disease, has come into rabbit populations up and down Cumbria, causing huge fluctuations in the populations that live there. So this has contributed to the vegetation growth because there's less graziers on the dunes keeping it at bay. But locally, research has been done into other factors as well. Increased rainfall, increase in temperatures and reduced wind speeds have also contributed to the growth of vegetation. And this is largely due to climate change. And factors such as nitrogen deposition coming from fumes from the air has also caused vegetation growth. But historically as well, we've managed dunes to stabilise them. This might be planting vegetation such as sea buckthorn, for example, to help stabilise the dunes. And all these factors have contributed to vegetation growth, the loss of habitat, and therefore the increase in scrub and vegetation, causing loss of biodiversity overall, because you've lost these mosaic of habitats which would naturally form through the disturbances, through the rabbits grazing, which will kickstart these early successional stages, forming the mosaic of habitats within a dune system. And these images show sand scale haws, so the red patches show bare patches of sand. So in 1946, almost 40% of sand scale haws was bare sand. So this is just across the Duddon estuary from Haverigg haws. And in recent years, this bare sand has gone down to less than 2%, pushed right to the outer edges of that dune system because of all of these influencing factors. And a typical dune system that we can see today has very little bare sand with increasing scrub and lots of coarser grasses, which is kind of what we see today. So Dynamic Dunescapes, working on Haverigg dunes, is looking to restore a large proportion of these habitats, so making 35% of the total sand dune resources in favourable condition. And this is supporting half of the most specialised species that live on the dunes, so 72 species in total, all the time piloting and sharing best practice. But bare sand is incredibly important. It is a problem that all of this scrub and vegetation and coarser grasses are coming into the dune systems. And it's a problem because many of our more specialised species rely on bare sand to thrive in the dune environment. They've adapted to be able to live in this sandy environment. So the scrub and vegetation coming in and overriding those habitats puts these species at risk. So for instance, the stand lizard, which you don't find in Cumbria, you find further south, relies on the bare sand for basking. The northern dune tiger beetle, which is only found on 2 locations in the UK, including Drigg and the Sefton coast, uses this open sand to run across the sand for foraging to capture its prey. Natterjack toads also rely on the bare sand for hibernating. They'll burrow in the sand to hibernate. And it's a breeding habitat for many species as well, such as your solitary bees, which will lay its eggs in the sand. And also a pioneer habitat for many rare and specialised plant species too. So let's look closer into Haverigg dunes. And Haverigg dunes are an amazing place. And they're quite unique compared to many of the other dunes up and down the Cumbrian coastline too, in that there's quite a large area of open bare sand on the Haverigg dunes caused by these big blowouts formed by storms and by wind, opening up these patches of bare sand. So this means there's quite a lot of earlier successional stages forming and growing and developing around the Haverigg dune site. So therefore it is able to support a wide variety of specialised species. So Haverigg dunes are incredibly species rich in terms of wildflowers, particularly out on the dune grassland, so in these more fixed dune habitats where the ground is more calcareous, so it's not acidic unlike many other sites. Most dunes tend to be acidic, but we've got a few in this area that are more calcareous. So there's a whole range of different wildflowers that live there, from wild thyme to lady's bedstraw, common century, trefoil, rest harrow. And these all provide important food sources for our pollinators. On Haverigg dunes, there's an abundance of pyramidal orchids that you can find too. And these have highly densely packed flower heads, so you can get about 100 flowers forming on top of the stem. And like many orchids, this relies on symbiosis to gain some of its energy from a very specific mat-forming fungus, which is found in the soil of these dune systems. And there's many other specialised species as well that rely on this bare sandy habitat. And one example is the dune pansy, and this is very common around the Cumbrian coastline. You can find a lot of it on the Haverigg dunes as well. And this is restricted to coastal habitats, but it's a very, very pretty flower to find. But there's some examples here of other higher plants found within the Duddon estuary, not necessarily on Haverigg dunes, but these are highly specialised species and nationally scarce in some cases too. So the dune helleborine is a type of orchid. It's almost similar to the marsh helleborine, but it grows a lot taller and it lives in much kind of sandier soils. But this is a nationally scarce species, but it has been noted on sand-scale haws. We also have the lax-flowered sea lavender, and this grows more on the salt marsh and the estuary. Again, this is a rare species that grows there. And the seaside century, which I mentioned before, again, this is a plant which is very much restricted to these coastal, very sandy areas of sand dune systems as well. Therefore, it's quite a rare species, but we do find it quite in abundance on Haverigg dunes and around the Duddon estuary too. And the round-leaved wintergreen, now this is a specially adapted plant. It will grow in the damper dune slack areas, so it requires this kind of wetter, bare areas to be able to thrive. So all of these plants are very, very specially adapted to grow in specific habitats found within your sand dunes. But because there's such a range of different wildflowers, different orchids and plant species, we've also got a wide variety of invertebrates as well. And butterflies, which you can find on the dunes, include the grayling butterfly, which you find again in abundance at Haverigg dunes. And these are actually a priority species and they are declining. And this is because they tend to need drier areas that are sparsely vegetated. So the dunes where you can find them that they live, where scrub is growing, this often outcompetes some of the food plants that they rely on to lay their eggs, such as sheep and red fescue grasses, which normally grow in your dune grassland habitat. We also get much more common species, small tortoiseshell. I don't think I've ever seen as many tortoiseshell before as of Haverigg dunes, and they feed on the nettle, so they'll lay their eggs on the nettle and the larvae will grow and feed on the nettle, and these are quite a common species. But this in the middle, this is the black-tailed skimmer, and this can be found patrolling gravel dips or even damper dune slack areas. And although they're a fairly common species, they're not normally found commonly this further north. They are a species that are increasing its range northwards due to global warming, so we are finding them more and more in our northern sand dune areas. They take around 2 to 3 years to mature. And this is similar to the ruddy darter as well, which we also find on our sand dunes. This wasn't necessarily common in the northern hemisphere, but it's started to move further north due to the changing climate. There's also many other kind of dragonfly and damselfly species, such as the azure, the emerald damselfly, large red damselfly as well, which are strikingly red, very easy to identify. But other notable species recorded in the Duddon estuary include a mining bee, which is called the Colletes Cunnincularius. And this is one of the larger of these mining bee species, and it lives in sand dune habitat. So again, it's quite a rare species, and it will burrow in the sand and lay its eggs in the sand too. So it requires these sandy habitats, and it's a very rare species. And throughout Haverigg dunes, throughout the drier season as well, it's also almost carpeted in almost a yellow moss, and this is called the yellow feather moss. It's often found on sand dunes, but other calciferous land too. And in the top left-hand corner here, this is known as the hoary fringe moss. So this is also being recorded on Haverigg dunes. This is more common in Ireland actually. It's a species at threat from a rising scrub again from scrub developing on dunes and shading this species. So it is a species at risk. But there's a range of mosses and fungi that grows on the dunes. I think over 200 species of mosses was recorded on sand-scale haws alone. The dune waxcap, which is this orange mushroom here, again, this is confined to the coastal sand dunes. It's thought to be saprobic, but it's been found to have this mutual relationship between the mosses and the grasses that grow around the dunes as well. And you may have noticed recently, this is a very common one. This is a parasol mushroom, which grows about 40 centimetres high, 40 centimetres in diameter. It's a fantastic thing to see out on the dunes. As I mentioned earlier, so Haverigg dunes are actually the growing and the recreating sand dune systems. This is because, don't have a close-up image of this, but right out of the sand you can see a single shingle spit starting to form right out there, and embryo dunes are starting to grow on top of this. But shingle habitat is an important habitat in itself. The shingle vegetation is nationally scarce and very rare habitat, as it's very slow growing and slow to form. But it holds a variety of specialised plant species which will only tend to grow in this kind of habitat, including your sea campion, which is fantastic for pollinators. It secretes a very sweet kind of nectar which draws specific insects in. You've also got your sea sandwort, which loves the shingle habitat, sea kale as well, which is what our cabbage which we eat today originates from. But not only is the shingle habitat important for the vegetation, it's important for associated invertebrates to that environment too, including species of jumping spiders, groundhoppers and carder bees, which are just found in this specific habitat. So it'll be very interesting to see in future how the shingle spit does develop Haverigg dunes and how that may change with time. On the dunes at Haverigg, over 120 bird species have been recorded in the area, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's more than that. They've got a huge variety of waders that live out on the sand. They feed out on the sand in the Duddon estuary. And this includes your oyster catchers, which feeds on cockles. They spend the winter on the coastline. And also huge flocks of dunlins as well. These are another wader, and they can flock in the thousands out on the Duddon estuary. It's a fantastic sight to see during winter time, and they'll roost on the nearby salt marshes. But you also get curlews and whimbrels, ringed plover as well. These are a resident species or sometimes pass through on migration. They're red conservation status, as are many of the waders that we find out there. But there's a whole variety of birds that live on the dunes too, which includes maybe the stone chat, which we can see in this top left-hand picture, linnets, twites, warblers and skylarks, which have a very distinct song call. But living nearby to Haverigg dunes, of course, is a Hodbarrow Nature Reserve, which is a fantastic spot for terns, and this includes the sandwich tern and the small little tern as well. And the terns spend winter off the west coast of Africa before returning to breed. And the little tern is it's the smallest tern in the UK. They migrate such a long distance, and they'll tend to feed off fish and sand eels out in the Duddon estuary. You may see them flying over around Haverigg dunes too. But other species that have also been recorded out on the dunes is the little owl. This is actually an introduced species, but it is declining due to loss of habitat. The short-eared owl, which is a medium-sized brown mottled colour owl, which is amber. It's an amber conservation status, so it's a species of European conservation concern. Barn owls have also been recorded out on the dunes too, and all of these species they'll predate on small mammals as well. Other predator species may include your sparrowhawk, merlin, which are easy to identify because they're quite small birds, but they'll chase their prey really quickly and swoop around. And you'll find kestrels too. So there's a huge variety of bird life which lives in both the dunes, but out on the estuary that you may see flying through too. But most notable for the sand dunes is the amphibians and reptiles, and the most infamous, of course, is the natterjack toad. And the Duddon estuary contains around about 25% of the UK's natterjack toad populations, and Haverigg dunes has huge potential for natterjack toads. Amphibian reptile conservation group do a lot of work to record the natterjacks and to see how they're getting on through looking at spawn counts, for instance, and I've been told that they're doing quite well there. But they are a threatened and a protected species, and this is largely due to the reduction and the change in habitat. So they'll breed within the dune slack, so in these ephemeral pools that will dry up over time. But they require very specific pools, so they need pools which are open, which are very sparsely vegetated. They're not the most apt at crawling across the ground either, so they find it very difficult to get over these coarser grasses and into the breeding areas. And in some cases, some of the pools are drying up more quickly because of the increase in scrub growth, while there are other pools that cold water all year round. This isn't very good for natterjack toads because the common frog and common toads and even dragonfly larvae in there can outcompete the tadpoles of the toad. But natterjack toads, they live up to around about 15 years. They feed off insects. They're nocturnal, so you'll see them across the sands and Haverigg dunes in the evenings of springtime, trying for them to capture the prey. So again, a stronghold of natterjack toads live in Cumbria, and Haverigg is probably one of the sites with the greatest potential, as I say, due to all of this sandy habitat which it does hold. Other amphibians and reptiles that you might find there too are the great crested newt, which are another rare and protected species. You also get the palmate and smooth newt there, the common lizards as well, and adders have been recorded in the area too. But on the dunes on Haverigg, there are some unwanted species too. Now, although this looks like quite a lovely flower, this is a non-native invasive species, and this is called Rosa rugosa, and it's one of the problems affecting our dune systems. It's one of the species, alongside native species, which is causing the overgrowth of scrub on our dunes. So there's many conservation works that we're going to be doing as part of the project, as part of Dynamic Dunescapes on Haverigg dunes in particular. And patches of Rosa rugosa have been found up and down the coast of Haverigg dunes. It's easily spread just by natural seed dispersal, but it's often a plant that's planted in people's gardens too, so it can easily spread from local locations too. So one of the methods Dynamic Dunescapes are doing, one of the conservation techniques, is working to remove some of this Rosa rugosa. And there's a few different ways that we do this, one of which, probably one of the most beneficial, is removal by machine. So this is where a digger comes, digs it out by its roots. It's got really long roots, and will burn it on site. Another method is by hand removal, and this is a job that can be done by volunteers, pulled out by its roots and again burnt on site. And another method that we use is called spot spraying. Now, this is the use of herbicides, so this is not a favourable thing that we would normally choose to do. This is only a technique that we'll use when we're unable to get out on site, or we don't think removal by hand would be effective enough. But spot spraying, to minimise any impact that it does have, the Rosa rugosa is chopped on its stem, and then the herbicide is directly applied to that open bit of stem, so it's not sprayed, it's directly applied to reduce the impact that this might have on the native species growing in and around that area. And this is something that we have already started on Haverigg dunes, and we've been working closely with Natural England here, who have been carefully spot spraying some patches, and it's great to see that the Rosa rugosa has reduced, but areas around it have started to grow back with native species, including the pyramidal orchids and early marsh orchids as well. One other thing that we'll be doing up and down Haverigg coastline, and this will be unique to this site, is doing for dune litter collection. So throughout the project, we've got funding to be able to get vehicles out on site. So we're hoping to gather a large community event around this, gather large groups of volunteers, local groups and school to come out and help do a mass litter pick all the way up and down this coastline. And any larger objects will be able to use these vehicles to be able to remove that litter. And this is really important to help protect all the wildlife that lives there, the massive array of birds that you find out on the coast that may even nest along the shingle on Haverigg as well. And conservation grazing. Now, grazing already happens on the dunes on Haverigg. Part of the land is owned by Millham Town Council, and part of the land is privately owned as well. And this other area a bit further along is already grazed. It's grazed by herdwick, which come down during winter time to graze, but also by native cattle stocks too, I think more during the summertime. But we'll be encouraging grazing in other areas, such as some of the dune slacks, which have overgrown with vegetation. And this is to create a little bit of disturbance, but to open up bare patches of sand through the trampling of the cattle too. And this is beneficial for the natterjack tours that live there. It allows places for the natterjack tours to burrow, to hibernate. It keeps the grass swards really short too, so natterjacks can easily crawl over it, and it's beneficial for ground nesting birds there, pollinators, and it allows more wildflowers to grow by keeping those coarser grasses at bay, which might outcompete those other species. And one other method is opening up bare patches of sand as well. So this is an example called turf stripping, which has been happening at South Walney Nature Reserve, and this won't be happening at Haverigg Dunes, but it's where some of the nutrient-rich soil, which might now be covered in bracken, covered in ragwort, is carefully removed, opening up the bare sand underneath. So embryo dune system starts to form and develop and is being created. But other methods that we use there, even just by hand, is called making scrapes. So these are just using a spade and opening up small patches of bare sand around the dune slack areas to provide this habitat for the hibernating natterjack toads. And another method that we're using on Haverigg Dunes is we will be removing some small areas of native species as well. And this is largely gorse. So in the first bit of land, the Millham Town Council land, before there's like a river which separates the land in between. This part of the land isn't grazed, and it has been overtaken by gorse. And this is kind of common dwarf varieties. Gorse tends to live for about up to 25 years, and it can provide very important habitats for birds such as stonechatcher, linnets, your yellow hammers, and a refuge for rabbits as well if you do find them on the dunes. And when they're in good management, the flowers as well can provide a source of nectar. However, if gorse is left on its own for a long period of time, which in this case it has done on Haverigg Dunes, they degenerate with time, and they need the management of the gorse, which is essential to keep it healthy and robust. So with the gorse degenerating over time, it starts to lose that value for wildlife, because the gorse itself, it becomes much more wooded underneath, and this is a huge increase for fire risk as well. But the gorse grows very, very rapidly, and a large area of Haverigg Dunes now is starting to be covered by this gorse. So one of the things that we will be doing is removing some of this gorse and burning it on site to open up these bare patches of sand underneath to allow those other native species or those other native specialised species to flourish, but also to help manage the gorse, some of the patches of gorse that's already there, so it can be much more valuable for the wildlife and much more productive. And finally, the other conservation actions that we'll be doing on Haverigg Dunes is working to restore some of the dune slacks there. So although we do have natterjack tours in the area, there's so much more potential for it to be a much more favourable site for these natterjack toads. And many of the pools are being overgrown with willow in particular. And again, this is no good for the natterjack toads. They find it very hard to get through to the pools with all this willow, with lots of scrub growth in the dune slacks as well. They tend to dry up a lot more quicker. So with the scrub growth, it's reducing the amount of favourable pools for natterjack breeding within different sites. And this is a case up and down Cumbria, but also England and Wales too. So what we do is we by hand will be removing some patches of this willow to open up these dune slacks to allow it to hold a little bit more water perhaps, but it also will enable the cattle to be able to come down to these areas and open up those bare patches of sand. And this is just an example of one of those dune slacks we'll be working with on Haverigg dunes. Lots of kind of overgrowth, very mature trees that are in there. But all the time we'll be ensuring that we do leave patches of trees, of gorse, of scrubland for the birds that live there too. So trying to have as minimal impact on the other species that live there as well. And access is really an important thing as for sand dunes as well. We want to encourage local people to get out on the dunes, to enjoy them and get the community involved as much as we can. And in some cases on sand dunes, the only patches of bare sand that we see now are where people are actually walking. So in some cases it can have a positive impact. So one of the things that we'll be doing as part of the Dynamic Dunescapes is that we are looking for local people to get involved to help practically conserve the dunes and get involved in these practical conservation techniques which I've just been talking about. So we will be seeking a local team of dedicated volunteers to come along to particular work days to help with some of this scrub removal, to learn to identify invasive species and help remove them. Also do some species surveying and recording too. And if you go on the Cumbria Wildlife Trust website, we have got some set dates now for conservation days at Haverigg Dunes. So we will be taking bookings for those from now onwards. So if you are local to the area, you are interested in learning new skills, getting practically involved, or know somebody who is interested, please do direct them to myself or the Cumbria Wildlife Trust website, where you will be able to book on and get involved. The project, which I don't think I mentioned earlier, is a 3-year project. So we will be looking to train up local volunteers, local volunteer rangers to help continue the works, to continue the project later on. And as I mentioned, working with the community is really important. We'll be working with school groups and volunteer groups, community groups, people of all ages and backgrounds, and we're hoping, as of when safe to do so next year, to run a series of events at Haverigg, including walks and talks, family drop-in sessions as well, with lots of fun nature activities for people to do, a mini bio blitz to learn about all the wildlife that does live there. We'll be looking at working with local dog walkers too, people who own dogs as well, to have some fun on the dunes, understand the disturbance as well sometimes that dogs may have on the dunes, but just having some fun activities as well for families over summertime. And all the time doing online talks, so you can catch us on social media, and you might see a new sign which is being put up outside of Haverigg Dunes as well, talking a little bit about the project. And other volunteer opportunities that you can get involved with as the project develops, it's getting involved in citizen science. Now, as part of the works that we're doing, we're setting up a long-term monitoring scheme, a 10-year long monitoring scheme to monitor the interventions that we are having on the sand dune system, to make sure what we're doing is effective, and to understand in a bit more detail the change in these habitats and the wildlife that lives there. And we've got an app which has just been released recently. It's just called Dynamic Dunescapes app, so you can have a look at downloading that now. And come springtime next year, I'll be running training sessions for volunteers to come out on the dunes, learn about the special species and species ID that lives there, to help monitor the species on your doorsteps. We'll also be running beach cleans, and as well, because I'll be running a series of family events and activities and all sorts of different things there, we'll be looking to train up volunteers to get involved, maybe even lead walks or talks or events themselves, and also train up natural ambassadors to be able to share the works and to share the important wildlife that we've got on the dunes, and to go out there and talk to people about the project too. So if you are interested in getting involved or finding out more, you can visit the Dynamic Dunescapes website, or you can follow the local social media as well at Cumbria Dunes. But if you are interested in volunteering, we're very keen to get a dedicated group of volunteers together specifically for Haverigg Dunes. Please do contact me directly, and I've left my email address there and my phone number too. But any volunteer activities coming towards January and February, they're now up online on the Cumbria Wildlife Trust website, so you can have a look there and click on get involved, and click on current opportunities or view what's on as well. And there's lots of things there that you'll be able to get involved with, and keep an eye out for future activities as well coming up. There'll be more and more things coming as the project develops. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to this talk this evening. There's a whole range of other talks and activities as part of Cumbria Wildlife Trust coming up. I think there's one to talk about seals in 1 or 2 nights' time. So there's all sorts of things going on that you'll be able to look and get involved with too. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop the recording.